Goedendag, Sander.
Hey, Vladimir. Good afternoon already. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah,
Something is. Yes, it's okay now. We had some small technical issues with this platform. Welcome to Azure Saturday again, but this year is online mode, not in person. I hope that next year
so
will
this
be.
This is my Dutch living room. Yep.
Yeah, I hope next year will be better and we will have in-person conference again.
I hope so, my friend.
Yep. Yeah, of course. Thank you for joining us, and I hope this presentation will be perfect, especially because so many people doesn't know how is important security of identity today. It's not just about username and password or so. So, stage is yours.
Thank you. So let's switch to the presentation indeed, and let's get this show going. Because indeed, as Vladimir said, there's a bunch of things that we need to be aware of with information security these days. And of course, we go on as we used to do for 20, 30, 40 years. But instead, what I'm going to try and show you today is that there's a different approach that you can use in terms of information security for your Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. And this is, well, to me, this is fun because what I think is that even if you don't need any of the Microsoft 365 services, you don't need Exchange Online or Shepherd Online or whatever, it doesn't matter because you can still benefit from coupling your Active Directory to Azure AD. Now, last year, I showed you guys and girls the 8 or 6, I think 6 horror stories of hybrid identity. That's when people get it wrong. But there's not much you can do wrong here because what we're trying to go do is add on top of the information security layers that Active Directory already has. And I hope you've already deployed those. So like the Active Directory tiering model and stuff like that. And then what I'm going to do is just reap the benefits from some of the Azure AD services so that you can, as an admin, you can sleep better. And what I'm going to show you today is that you can go to a scenario, you can live in a world where people only have to change their passwords when they need to. So they don't need to change them every 42 days, every 70 or 90 days, or even every year. They only have to change them when they need to. And that means that we have to do some stuff. And of course, the other thing that I'm trying to go and show you is how to get on and but also stay on top of things with Active Directory and Azure AD, because there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of moving parts, and not every admin has the time, has the screen real estate, so the pixels, to get all the information, to see everything that's going on. And I feel that we need some help with that, and Azure AD can help us with that. And it's not that difficult to do. And actually, I'll try to show you in my demo for some of these parts. But first, let me elaborate a bit more on what Vladimir just said, because there is a problem with passwords, and we cannot just go on like we used to. Because if we're looking at passwords, then what we're seeing is that there's really big problems with just using passwords. And that's because these passwords are being cracked, they're being stolen, they're being intercepted just from the wire. They're getting eavesdropped as you just communicate with your domain controller. There's all kinds of attacks that are actually happening in real time. There's actually some vulnerabilities still in Active Directory that are being exploited by criminals these days. So yeah, you don't want that. And on top of that, what we're seeing is that as people, we are just really bad at creating passwords. And because of that, and because there's no penalty, if you will, if you do, we just reuse passwords. So I see people reuse, and there's examples from the past where people would just reuse a password between a leaked service like an Ashley Madison or another service, and then reuse that as their Active Directory password, their Microsoft 365 password, their admin password, and you name it. And it's about 73% of passwords are actually reused. So it's a big problem. And because of all those leaks that are happening, and I think our buddy Troy Hunt, also a Microsoft MVP, is now averaging, I think, 2 point something data leaks per day. So it's really becoming a big problem. And if it's not just a problem in your environment, even if you have the most perfect colleagues out there, then still passwords are in the way because people forget them. We just had a semi-national holiday in the past week. So on Monday, there will be a lot of colleagues that have forgotten their password. Well, actually, if they partied right, they would have forgotten their passwords. And I hope they did. So there's a bunch of help desk requests that will be coming our way that we need to address. And of course, all those password resets cost loads and loads of money. And now, of course, you might think, okay, so how bad is this problem? Well, 81% of all digital incidents are related to weak and leaked passwords. 81%. And it's usually the way they get in. It's usually the first step to getting somewhere. And if it's not the first step, then it is the thing that helps criminals move laterally within your organization, searching for admin access and admin passwords until they do. And then, of course, 20% of IT costs for organizations are made to help end users with lost passwords. Now, of course, there's several solutions to this, and of course, Microsoft would want you to believe that passwordless is the way to go. But even if you go to passwordless, there's still things that you need to do because passwordless in the Microsoft world is still not 100% game. We still need to make sure that our colleagues actually use that one credential. And today we can actually get to a point, we can live in a world where our colleagues just use one username and one password. And if we get there, then I think we're not, halfway there would be negative. You would almost have done everything you need to do because just enabling passwordless on that one credential, that becomes one of the easier steps. So how do we get to that one password and that one credential? So everything that you can federate, everything that's an app or a system or a service that supports federation, you federate it. And that means you get to that one password. Now, of course, we all work at home. You can see the pictures on my wall. I'm here at home. If I lose my password, then the easiest thing that we can do from an end user perspective is to enable and implement self-service password reset. That is pretty darn easy with Azure Active Directory. So we can use that. But it's not the focus on what we're going to do today, because the focus for today is to implement multi-factor authentication everywhere, to implement and look at identity protection, and to ban bad passwords. Now, of course, as an organization, there's 2 additional steps that you can take. So the first one is to subscribe to Troy Hunt's HaveIBeenPwned.com. Just register your DNS domain name there, and every time Troy Hunt finds one of your people's email addresses or usernames in one of the data breaches, you will get notified. And of course, if you are not restricted by law or by other regulations, then you can configure passwords for end users to not expire. And that really helps them to create a password that is difficult, but pretty easy to remember to them, because they can use it for a longer period of time. Now let's start with implementing multi-factor authentication everywhere. And this is pretty easy, because the only thing you have to do is make sure that you put multi-factor authentication in the path of authentications to your apps, your services, your systems. And in some cases, it's hard. And most people think, or tend to think, that implementing multi-factor authentication for your interactive logons to Windows servers and stuff is the way to go. It's actually not. But what you want to do is to apply multi-factor authentication for every external and every privileged access. Now, there's two solutions from Microsoft that you can use for that. It's Azure MFA. It's a service that Microsoft runs as part of Azure AD. And it's the Azure MFA server that is currently being deprecated. Now, Azure multi-factor authentication, Azure MFA, is free if you use Azure AD security defaults. And that means that an admin always have to perform multi-factor authentication for each and every authentication, but your people will only be prompted to perform multi-factor authentication if Microsoft's risk analysis of authentications and users deems it necessary to do so. But of course, you don't need to rely on Azure AD security defaults. You can also use Azure AD conditional access. And with Azure AD conditional access, with Azure AD conditional access, you can have really fine-grained options to say, you know what, I want my people to perform multi-factor authentication unless they are within the buildings of my organization. You just define the egress IP addresses, so the external IP addresses for your organization, and then you define that people no longer have to perform multi-factor authentication on these locations. And that might adopt or lead to more adoption of your multi-factor authentication strategy. Now, there's not just multi-factor authentication for Microsoft 365 and everything like that. You can use Azure MFA with the Azure AD application proxy, and there's an NPS extension for Azure MFA, so you can have your NPS servers providing radius authentication to your Citrix, your VMware Horizon, your, well, whatever you have that users use to work from home. And of course, you can have the Azure MFA adapter for Active Directory Federation services. So there's a built-in adapter in Windows Server 2016 and Windows Server 2019 ADFS that you can just enable through PowerShell, and that allows you to require multi-factor authentication, not just for Microsoft 365, but for all your ADFS integrated apps, services, and systems. The one thing that I really want you to take away from this slide is that if you have a choice between Azure MFA and Azure MFA Server, please always choose the Azure MFA route. Always choose Azure MFA. Now there's three shapes, and I actually told you guys this already, but I've also made a graphical slide for this. There's three shapes of Azure MFA. So if you have a federated application that is integrated with ADFS, then that Azure MFA adapter on the left is the way to go for all your MFA needs. And what it will do is it will run an agent, and if ADFS has a requirement to perform multi-factor authentication, it will reach out to Azure AD. It will reach out to that one credential, that one MFA and SSPR registration in Azure AD, and it will use that information to perform multi-factor authentication. If you have a legacy application, you can use the Azure MFA extension for NPS and do exactly the same thing. And of course, all the Azure AD integrated applications and all the Microsoft 365 services are just integrated already. And a user, your colleague, will just go to that application and Azure MFA will be triggered if there's a need to with conditional access or security defaults. Now, there's a couple of tips and tricks, and I think this is the most important thing of every presentation that I do. I do this stuff all the time. I assess people's hybrid identity implementations. I design them, I implement them, I have a team, we manage them. And these are just our golden tips and tricks for Azure MFA. So the first thing is to enable the combined registration for self-service password reset and for multi-factor authentication. This is an option in Azure AD, and if you've have disabled that somewhere in the past, then please enable it. If you have a new tenant, and I have a pretty new tenant for my demos today, then what you'll see is that you can no longer disable that combined registration. And it means that if you get prompted for self-service password reset, or if you get prompted for MFA, all that information is stored in that one registration, that one information with all your preferences. So it doesn't matter if you perform SSPR or MFA, it's always your same preferences, it's always the same method that you get. And you can always fall back to all the other methods that you've configured and that are allowed in your organization. So you can have the phone call, you can have the Authenticator app, you can have the Authenticator one-time password, you can have your third-party one-time password, you can have a voice call, and you can have a text message. It's just multi-factor authentication on your terms. The admin, however, will require you or will tell you when MFA is actually required. Now, there's a difference between registering and performing MFA. So before you can perform MFA, before an admin can require it from a colleague, he or she needs to register MFA. If it's not registered, then this whole method is just flawed, because now if I don't have an MFA registration, you require MFA for me, but I haven't registered yet, and a criminal logs in, he or she steals my credentials, he or she then logs in, and now he or she has to register my MFA. Well, of course, he or she will register my MFA for me, but it will always lock me as a colleague out. So we don't want that. We want strong authentication, and for that, we require people to register MFA as soon as possible. And there's two ways you can do that in Azure AD, or with Azure AD, or with Azure MFA. And the first is that if you put them in scope of a policy that provides them with self-service password reset, they have to register their security information at the next sign-in. There is no other way. If you do not register your MFA at the next sign-in, you just cannot sign in. You won't get signed in. Now, if you bring people in scope for MFA through conditional access or security defaults, then people are required to register MFA within a 14-day grace period. So that's a big difference, and your MFA strategy should take these two options into consideration. Now, of course, you have to choose how people perform MFA. So through conditional access, you can specify everything, and I'll show you in my demo. And in identity protection and security defaults, as I already told you, they're prompted only for risky sign-ins. Now, whatever you do, don't use the legacy phone factor portal to require or configure anything with multi-factor authentication. That old legacy phone factor portal is no longer necessary for anything. And let me show you in my demo. Let me switch to my demo. Here we go. This is my ADFS server. We're going to need it later on. I'm using ADFS in this demo for a specific reason. This is the Azure portal that I'm showing you here. It's just a plain portal with a new tenant. And I've already clicked on my Azure Active Directory, as you can see. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the user settings first, and I'm going to look at the option for feature preview settings. And what I want you to see is that this option, the users can use the combined security information registration experience, is in this tenant is grayed out. Now, if this is set to none or select, please set it to all for your tenant as well to get that one MFA and SSPR registration. Now back to my tenant, I'm going to click on security now, and then on conditional access. And conditional access, if Azure AD is in that authentication chain and authorization chain toward your applications, then you can use conditional access. And with conditional access, you can define really rich policies. So let me just give it a name. It doesn't really matter what name it is, because I really want to show you these assignments and access controls. So with assignments, one of the things that I can do is, for instance, I can say, you know what, I want all people in, well, you know the drill, right? In Azure AD, global administrator, that's the bad guy. So let's target global administrator. And you know what, while we're at it, there's also people in the, let me see, what's fun? The Teams administrators role. Let's click that one. I'll just click on a random one. Doesn't really matter. I just want to show you the strength of conditional access. So now I have people in 2 directory roles. And of course, I can exclude people there. I can say, you know what, I don't want it to apply to a specific guy. Let's pick one. This one, for instance. I don't want it to apply to that person because I don't know, it's a service account or whatever. So you can do that. Now, as the second step, I need to define the applications or the user actions that this applies to. So by default, I can say, you know what, all cloud apps, which is fun. There's user actions as well, so I can apply anything for only registering security information if I need to. But let's just stick to all cloud apps, or let's select an app and let's say, you know what, I want this to apply to all the Office 365 app, or just one app or 2 apps or whatever. I can select all that, or I can say, you know what, it's all cloud apps and then exclude one app. It's really rich, and you can really set the stage here. Now, of course, I want to do things with conditions. So I can do different things with user risk. So if it's high or medium, I can do different things than if it's low, for instance. I can do things with device platforms. So I can say, you know what, this only applies when you're logging on or signing in with Windows or with Mac OS. I can do things with locations. So I can say, you know what, I want you guys to perform MFA, and I'll do that later. And I'll say, you know what, any location except my trusted locations. And I'll show you in a minute where to do that. Now there's client apps as well. And of course you want to configure that because you want these 2 always to be disabled for all your conditional access policies, because those are the legacy authentication options. And I can do things if I have Intune, for instance, with device state. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to say what kind of authentication information security measure you have to perform. So I can say, you know what, I'm going to grant you access, or I'm going to block access, for instance. I can say, you know what, this would work. If I would select this and save it, then admins, except for that one admin, would not be able to sign into the Azure portal unless they're inside a trusted location. Or I can say, you know what, if you're not inside a trusted location, I want you to perform multi-factor authentication, or I want you to require a device that is Intune managed and Intune says it's okay. And now I have require all, so now you have to do both. But I can also say, you know what, I want you to perform either. And then the fun part is, because we're doing things with multi-factor authentication, I can say, you know what, for admins, I want these guys to perform multi-factor authentication every 9 hours, for instance. Select. Now, of course, I'm a global admin in this tenant, so I'm getting the option to not lock myself out or to perform report-only mode. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the breadcrumbs and say, you know what, all my edits I know will be discarded, because I wanted to show you the named locations, and I want to add a location, and this could, for instance, be my building, for instance, and I can use IP ranges, and I can mark it as a trusted location, and here I can just specify an external IP address that defines my building on the internet. So that's conditional access, and it's really strong for all your Microsoft 365 services and apps, for all your Azure AD integrated applications, and for all your Azure AD app proxied on-prem applications. Let's switch back to the presentation, because I have way more fun stuff to show you today. Where is it? It is here. Yes. Because I also want to show identity protection, or tell you a little more about identity protection. And identity protection is Microsoft's risk and artificial intelligence, machine learning based risk analysis platform. And it's enabled for all Microsoft Cloud sign-ins, including Microsoft accounts. So Microsoft has trillions of sign-ins each day, and they all go through the identity protection model. And if there's an outlier in your authentication, so for instance, you would normally just sign in from Belgrade or from Serbia, and now you would suddenly sign in from France, and then you would be flagged as a risky sign-in. If you do that often, you will probably get flagged as a risky user. If it's France and then Germany and then Poland, for instance. But when you perform multi-factor authentication, when required, then you actually tell the platform that it is a false positive. You're actually on holiday, you're actually touring Europe, you're actually on a business trip or whatever. Then the platform will learn that you are not just some person that is sitting behind a desk in the office all day, but you actually go out and do stuff. Well, when COVID subsides, right? And there's another thing that Azure AD Identity Protection does, and Microsoft works together with Google and Facebook and a bunch of other major players in the industry, that if there's leaked credentials, then what they'll do is the identity protection will inform admins through notifications. And if you actually have password hash sync enabled, and you can always enable password hash sync behind ADFS or behind pass-through authentication, then actually leaked credentials will be checked against the credentials that your organization use. So a leaked credential, if it's leaked, will be hashed with the same hashing method that Active Directory used. Then it will be hashed again, so that it will be the same as the Azure AD hash that is stored in Azure AD for your user, and then those two values are compared. So it's not that Microsoft tries to log on with leaked or stolen credentials or whatever. Microsoft has a back-end process that actually performs these checks. And as you saw, it's integrated with conditional access. It's integrated with Cloud App Security as well. And if you want to configure anything about identity protection, then you'll need an Azure AD Premium P2 license. But by default, it's always on. And if you do not have Azure AD Premium P2 licenses, just sit back and enjoy the ride. If there's a person that is prompted for multi-factor authentication because of risky sign-ins, then be aware from a help desk perspective that you might be able to help this person to flag some of their risky sign-ins as safe as well. But if you do have Azure AD Premium P2, then check the sign-ins, check the risky sign-ins report, check the risky users report, and actually become a proactive help desk where you help people sign into your tenant. And of course, one of the other things that you can do with Azure AD Premium P2 is configure an MFA registration policy that doesn't play by the SSPR or MFA playbook if you need that.
Okay, here is the App Store.
And let's continue with banning bad passwords, because this is the other thing that I want to show you. There's actually in Azure AD, there's a feature called Azure AD Password Protection. And Azure AD Password Protection allows you to ban the weak passwords and passwords that are among the top 1,000 leaked passwords, and passwords that are easily guessable, and passwords that are reused in leaked services and apps and systems. And of course, that top 1,000 leaked passwords is a list that is upgraded often. So what you want to do is you want to install agents on your domain controller and then configure that. But also what you want to do is you want to have a proxy component that actually talks to Azure AD and gets those lists of leaked passwords. And Microsoft has an architecture for this, and if you're into the administrative tiering model for Active Directory, then you probably won't have your domain controllers connected to the internet. Instead, you would use proxies and stuff like that. There's a password protection proxy as well, and my recommendation is to install that on the same server as you run Azure AD Connect on, because it already has all the URL restrictions enabled for it. And then as an admin, you define the bad passwords. Then you install the password protection proxy, and then you install the agent on all your domain controllers. And then as a colleague changes the password, he or she can no longer use weak passwords. Now there's a couple of tips and tricks that I want to share. So you want to install the password protection agent on all your domain controllers. If a user hits a domain controller that does not have the agent, then he or she is not bound to all the banned password protection measures that you've taken as an admin. Please ensure on your domain controllers that you have the .NET Framework 4.7.2 or up, because that is what is needed. If it's not installed yet, or if it's out of date, then you need to restart your domain controllers. That means 2 restarts, and that's not something that you want to do during opening hours. Of course, you have an audit mode, and my suggestion is to use it before enabling the enforce mode. And you want to ban things like locations and cities and products and bosses as banned passwords. But my other recommendation is not to ban swear words. We did an experiment with that, and what we found is that a lot of people use swear words in their passwords just because it's the only field these days in IT that is actually hidden from view, which is censored by default. And I can guarantee you that if you have a lot of colleagues that do a lot of swearing in their passwords and then they can no longer swear in passwords, probably you would have a very shitty job going forward, because now there's no way to channel all that frustration, and they'll probably end up on your plate. Now, getting and staying on top of things is pretty easy if you have Azure AD, because there's 3 things that you can do. And the first thing that you can do is to enable Azure AD Connect Health. So with Azure AD Connect Health, what you can do is you can get notifications and errors in your ADFS just as easy as you could otherwise. So let me just switch to my demo environment. Let's switch back again. I'm just going to show you here in security. I'm going to show you the authentication methods. and password protection. This is where all these bands are, and this is where you can enforce your custom add words that are 4 characters or more. Here's the audit mode and stuff like that, so you can use all that. But what I'm going to show you first is to go to Azure AD Connect to enable Azure AD Connect Health. So this is Azure AD Connect, and on the bottom there's a link to Azure AD Connect Health. Here it is. This is enabled by default for your Azure AD Connect box. And this is where you get your sync errors, and this is where you can have your notifications and stuff like that. And global admins are notified by default. Now there's also sync services. So this will give you an overview of the health of your Azure AD Connect server, and it will also tell you, for instance, what the version is. Let me just quickly show you of your Azure AD Connect installation, because this is all stuff that Azure AD Connect just synchronizes to Azure AD for you. Now going back to Azure AD Connect Health, then you will also notice that there's ADFS services here and ADDS services here. And what I'm going to do, let me go back to Quick Start. Let me download the Azure AD Connect Health agent for ADFS. Let's run it, because I will just show you how easy this is. Let's configure now. Oh, I've already installed it on this box. Well, easy does it. I don't even have to show you. It's next finish, by the way. So let's close it, I'm sure. And let me just show you what's in ADFS right now. Let me show you what it says. And it says it's unhealthy. Ooh, and I've got 7 active alerts. So let's dive into that. Let's look at all these alerts, and let's see what it says. So there's an endpoint enabled that shouldn't be. ADFS auditing is disabled. There's DNS that might be problematic. My SSL certificate is about to expire, and health service data is not up to date. Wow. Okay. Well, I didn't even know that about my ADFS server, but because of Azure AD Connect Health, I actually now know this. And if I click on this, it will actually tell me how to resolve this. It will actually tell me, you know what? Run this command line, and you will have auditing. And of course, make sure that you look at that those audit events. Cool. Back to the presentation. So as I said, there's Azure AD Connect Health for Azure AD Connect, for ADFS, and for ADDS. You need a Azure AD Premium license to get started with this, but then you will actually benefit from it. A couple of tips and tricks. Let me see if I can get there. Here we go. It requires 1 Azure AD Premium license per Azure AD Connect installation and 25 Azure AD Premium licenses in the tenant. Doesn't matter if they're assigned or not, but you need 25 of these licenses per ADFS server, per web application proxy, and per domain controller. So if you have 2 domain controllers, 2 ADFS servers, and 2 web application proxy and an Azure AD Connect server, you can do the math. You need 151 premium licenses. Of course, if you run Azure AD Connect for a large organization, make sure you also have an Azure AD Connect box in staging mode, because if your Azure AD Connect breaks, you can no longer rely on the synchronization. And that means that if you fire someone on the spot, if you make changes, then, well, they may or may not get to Azure AD, and that might cause problems, well, sort of related to lingering objects, but then in Azure AD. I've got a demo here, but I already demoed it. So let's go to the last 2 topics of this slide deck. There's Microsoft Defender for Identity. This is an E5 license thing, and Microsoft Defender for Identity goes beyond everything that you knew that was possible for Microsoft to prevent and detect and investigate breaches in your on-premises Active Directory. Now, this product used to be known as Advanced Threat Analytics, and ATA was a completely on-premises product with an on-premises database and stuff like that, but it grew into terabytes for some organizations. And now Microsoft has converted it through Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Azure ADP as it was called, into a purely cloud solution called Microsoft Defender for Identity. And the only thing that you need to do is install the Microsoft Defender for Identity agents on your domain controllers and your ADFS servers. Now, those ADFS servers are new since January of this year. And Microsoft will go through the logs and all the events that the agents collect, and they will actually tell you when there's a vulnerability. They will actually tell you how to remediate these vulnerabilities. They will enable you to detect in real time if there's a breach going on. And even if it doesn't detect it, then you can always hunt for breaches. If you think that there's something going on, but you're not really sure what's going on, then you can use key query language or Custo query language, KQL queries, to actually hunt for anomalies. So this is pretty good stuff, but it's still more audits, more incidents, more events. And if they're already going over your head, then you might also need an additional solution, and that's Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel is a solution that is on top of the Azure Log Analytics and on top of Azure Monitor. And Azure Sentinel actually has playbooks and stuff like that. And it goes way beyond Active Directory, because there's also integrations with Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, with Azure Defender, with the Windows Defender, with the Cloud App Security Broker. And you can have everything collecting to Azure Sentinel and correlate it there, so you can actually see what is going on end-to-end in your organization, on-prem and in the cloud. Now, to wrap things up, because we're almost at 45 minutes, I'm going to give you a small conclusion of this session to just tell you what we've been talking about. So what I feel is, with Azure AD password protection, with Azure AD conditional access, with Azure AD identity protection, you can instruct your colleagues and give them policies that allow them to only change their passwords when they need to. And even if a password is leaked, is breached, is stolen, is phished, whatever, then multi-factor authentication will have your back, because it will just prompt if someone, for instance, from another part of the world logs on as that user, while normally the user wouldn't even go there. And I've also shown you that you can manage your on-premises infrastructure better using Azure AD Connect Health. And it's available for the Azure AD Connect installation in your organization, for ADFS servers, for web application proxies, and for your domain controllers. And I've shown you how to integrate everything and get on top of millions of events. And then for that, you can use Microsoft Defender for Identity, and you can use Azure Sentinel. So Vladimir, what do you think? Is this something that that you've been doing already? Is this something that you're eager to start doing now?
Oh, basically, that is one of the most painful questions when you're talking about client and they're thinking about everything of that. So definitely we need to, all of us, to start thinking about how that will be changed in the following, maybe not months, maybe even years, because that could be a little bit complex for transition. So
yes, of course, yes. But if you're not focusing, so this is important, right? Because as admins, we only have a certain amount of time each week to do stuff.
Yeah.
So if you just don't focus on the phone factor portal, just forget about it. if we don't mess with Azure MFA server anymore, just forget about it, then all we have to do in terms of security, in terms of authentication, is to focus on these topics. And that's it, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I think that all clients have to think to implement multi-factor authentication as soon as possible, even though for some low-level workers, I don't know, some older workers, that will be more complicated to manage, but we need to learn. Basically, we don't want to learn from our mistakes. That is maybe the best thing. So definitely it's not a good idea, based on your talk, to have the same password everywhere, especially if password is complex. So if one password is leaked, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We have one interesting question. Is it possible to use AD MFA when signing into on-prem or Windows Virtual Desktop domain joined machines, similarly as it is with AD MFA integration with Horizon or Storefront Citrix?
Yes. So if you switch me back to my demo environment, I will actually tell you how to do that. I will actually show you how to do that.
Of course.
So here in Azure AD Connect, it shows you things about on-premises application. And you can have that application proxy. And if it's a web application, then you can actually have that application proxy installed. And it will set up a tunnel to Azure Active Directory, and it will actually surface your app within Azure AD. And it will tell people, you know what, if you want to access that app through the My Apps portal, for instance, then you just click on it. Azure AD does its magic. Azure AD uses the tunnel that application proxy has set up to Azure AD. We will tunnel that traffic through the tunnel to the on-premises application, and there we do our stuff. And as long as that application supports header-based authentication, as long as that application is Active Directory integrated, that works flawlessly. And it's really easy. And actually, for instance, the remote desktop web gateway is now supported. Well, I think it's been supported for the last 6 months now, and we're seeing a real uptick in Azure AD application proxy deployment projects with that setup.
Great explanation. I hope that Zlatko will found some interesting in that for his environment. So basically,
thanks for that question, Zlatko.
So basically, yes, that is one of the really important topics today, and so many people will not take care about that. Especially security is one of the most complicated and most important topics today. So yes, thank you for joining us. As I said, hope that next year will be in-person conference, and hope that we will soon